It's no secret Diablo 4 is currently looking, well, she looking mighty fine, if you know what I'm saying. And today I wanted to check out the source a little bit more because in games like this, class identity is one of the absolute biggest things that you must get right. The more unique the class feels, the more ways you can play the class and it still feels unique, the better it is. No one really wants to play those generic watered down classes that feel the same. Everyone wants to feel unique. Everyone wants to look at themselves and say, yeah, I do things differently. I feel different. If your sorceress plays the exact same way as your barbarian, you have done something wrong. And let's hope that this is currently not the case. Well, okay, spoilers, it's definitely not the case currently. But there is a potential slippery slope that I want to potentially address here.
What's up, everybody? This is Osuberg 501, and today I want to go over an overview for the Sorceress class in Diablo 4. The Sorcerer or Sorceress is going to
Please, call it a sorc or source.
be the archetypal caster or wizard of Diablo 4 and is going to play a very similar role to the Sorcerer from every other Diablo game. And the strengths of this class
I hope that honestly means that we're gonna have things like melee swords, bear swords, zeal swords. Maybe our swords would even be pretty cool. The more unique ways to build something, the better.
are going to lie in a massive AoE, massive amounts of crowd control, and pretty effective movement abilities. But like the sorcerers from previous Diablo games, they are going to be more of a glass cannon class. The sorcerer is going to be focused around 3 different elements: cold, lightning, and fire, having a bunch of abilities in all of the different categories for each one of these elements, and seeming to have a lot of different builds for each one of these elements. Now, sorcerer skills are going to be split into 6 different categories. Now, these categories don't exclude you from using any combination of skills you want, except for the ultimate category. So
you as a Diablo player, you obviously probably think the exact same as I. That you can go into any tree, main it, but you can still use the other skills without any lockouting. If there's gonna be any type of real lockouting, for example, if you go purely into frost, and that means you can't use anything else like fire or lightning, that would be absolutely devastating. But honestly, you know what? I really like that they're using the classic Diablo 2 style principle, but at the same time, I would honestly like a 4th tree, a 4th element or something like that. Maybe they could add in that with the next upcoming patches for the game and something like that. But that would be amazing. I think that's what we all really, really want. We want a stable base game, which resembles Diablo in every way that we love it, and then we want iterations on it. A 4th tree and things like that.
So these categories are essentially just groupings of different skills that give you a quick idea of what that skill is going to do and how it's going to perform. So starting off, you have basic abilities, and these are going to be some of the weakest but some of the most spammable abilities for the sorcerer. If you've played any other Diablo game, you know what to expect with these. They're spammable, don't really cost any resources, and with upgrades, most of them can generally start to generate you resources. So for
this is Diablo 3 type of game style, and I'm honestly not against it.
Since one of them is a Frostbolt, you just throw a bolt at an enemy that deals some damage and chills that enemy, slowing them down. And that's what that...
The power creep could be actually real maybe in this game, because look at this. Max cap damage 324 to 393. That is roughly a 20% increase. So the power scaling is going to be pretty big probably. And I kind of don't like that. We don't need the numbers to be big, okay? The numbers do not need to be huge, ginormous. I don't want 3,400 quadrillion damage like in Diablo 3. I want normal numbers, I don't want filler. I don't want my numbers to have bill next to them, because that doesn't feel good, okay? If you're dealing 2 to 3 billion damage and the damage says 2 to 3 bill, it seems like you're doing just 2 to 3 damage. and that's kind of not great, honestly. I would love the damage cap to be somewhere around 10,000 ish, maybe 15,000 ish or something like that. That would probably feel pretty good.
Ability would do at a baseline would have no resource cost, wouldn't generate any resource, but if you upgrade this skill, one of the upgrades allows it to start generating mana after hitting chilled or frozen enemies. So basic skills are the skills you're always going to be able to use, and if you have no other cooldowns up or resources up, you can still be spamming these skills. They're not going to be your primary source of damage. They're generally not going to be skills you build your entire character around, but they're always useful and going to generally be in every build. And next up, we have core skills, and as the name suggests, these are going to be some of your strongest and most primarily used abilities on this class. Pretty much all these are going to have a pretty high mana cost, so they're not something you're going to be able to infinitely spam. They're all generally going to be AoE abilities, and they're also going to have a lot of legendary powers that can affect them.
Okay, this is one of the things I'm actually a little bit worried about Diablo 4, because this is a super slippery slope in almost any game. PoE suffers from it, Diablo 3 got absolutely shreked by it, and that is the fact how this type of gameplay actually ends up being. So, there's 100% going to be this small problem. That there are going to be some builds, some methods, some legendary affixes and whatnot that are going to make it that you can spam something that usually would leave you with no mana, but you can constantly spam it and that's not a problem. There's going to be builds like that. And the slippery slope in this situation is, how do you actually balance that? Because if you can use some ability that's supposed to not be spammable and you make it into something that can be spammed non-stop without question, the problem becomes that other abilities that cannot be spam used like that, that actually requires you to use some kind of resource generator or something like that, are just gonna feel worse. So what do? Do you make this one ability a build that can be spammed? Or do you make every ability now spammable with a certain build? And I don't want that, because that is probably going to ruin the game, in my opinion. If every build revolves around the idea that you're going to make some ability that costs mana spammable non-stop without any generation or anything like that. Because that means that your basic attack is going to be the most influential thing, and you're just going to be using one skill constantly. And most likely that's going to mean that everything around it is just going to be a buff to your basic damage that you are currently spamming non-stop, aka how currently it is on Diablo 3. And let's face it, most people don't want that. I don't want that.
For instance, we have Fireball, has a mana cost of 50, and you hurl an exploding ball of fire, dealing...
And that is also a 20% pretty much increase per rank. Okay.
Damage to surrounding enemies. And you're probably pretty familiar with this skill if you've seen or played any other of the sorcerers from any other Diablo game. But core skills are what...
Does Diablo 3 actually have Fireball? I don't think it does.
A lot of builds are going to be built around. They do a lot more damage. They're usually AoE based. They do cost mana, but generally they're much stronger for costing mana, and they're going to have a lot of legendary effects and other effects that are going to be able to affect them and make them much stronger. And next up, we have defensive skills, and as the name suggests, these are primarily going to be based around keeping your character alive through damage reduction, shielding, or even movement. Now on the defensive side, you have something like Flame Shield that has a 20-second cooldown, and you engulf yourself in flames for 2 seconds.
Invulnerable. Oh.
Seconds, burning nearby enemies for damage per second, but while the shield is active, you are fully immune to damage. But then you have something on the movement side in Teleport, which has an 11-second cooldown, and you transform into lightning, becoming unstoppable and surging to a location, dealing damage around you upon arrival.
Now this is pretty cool. I kind of like the concept. Hopefully, this is gonna be bosses because again, I kind of hope Diablo 4 is gonna take the Path of Exile route when it comes to actual end game content and bossing and whatnot. That it's gonna be skill dependent, not actually a stat check. You know, stat checks kind of cool, kind of necessary, honestly, in games like this. But I would love it to be skill based, not a stat check thing. And if everyone is supposed to use cooldown that's defensive. Honestly, I would much rather have that you have like a dodge button or something like that. Instead, well, no, technically you can have these defensive things, but it's like, I don't. It should probably be better if it's optional to a degree, I think, but it's kind of hard to say currently.
Teleport probably being the most iconic skill of sorcerers, and one of the very big reasons why this archetype in Diablo is generally seen as having very high movement, because most builds are going to end up using teleport, and usually there's ways to manipulate or augment teleport to make it even more useful. Maybe giving a reduced cooldown, being able to teleport multiple.
Are you also of the people whose opinion is that Enigma destroyed Diablo 2 and everyone got teleported in Lord of Destruction? I wonder. I personally don't think that, but then again, I am a PvPer in Diablo 2, so my opinion's a little bit different on that.
Multiple times per cooldown or other things like that. And generally, you're going to probably have one or more defensive skills in every single build. Because like I mentioned, most builds are probably going to have teleport, and then most builds will probably also have one of the other defensive skills to keep themselves alive as well. And next up, we have Conjuration. Now, Conjuration skills have been a pretty big staple of sorcerers for all of the Diablo games, but these are only generally used in more specialized or specific builds, or
Well, if your then affinity is Conjuration, yeah, I guess that's pretty much a specialization.
more as filler spells. For instance, we have Hydra, a mana cost of 20, and you summon a 3-headed Hydra for 8 seconds. Each head spits fire at nearby enemies, dealing damage. So unless you're creating a build specifically around one of these conjuration spells, these are usually not used or used more as a filler or additional damage. For instance, there have been a lot of builds in the past that use something similar to Hydra as an additional spell to throw out, but is not your main damage and not your main spamming abilities.
I think things like Hydra are really cool if you're in some kind of boss fight. You just prompt it down for extra DPS. As long as it feels like you want to do it and you kind of need to do it because you can feel it, there is absolutely no problem with filler spells.
And next up, we have mastery skills. Now, these are kind of similar to core abilities, but these ones are generally more substantial and much more focused on massive, big damaging AoE spells. For instance, we have Meteor. With a 40 mana cost, you summon a meteor that strikes a target location, dealing damage and burning the ground for more damage over 3 seconds. And likewise, we have Blizzard. With a mana cost of 40, you summon a frigid blizzard that deals damage and continuously chills enemies over 8 seconds. And similar to core abilities, these are abilities that will have a lot of builds specifically focused on them. There have been many Meteor builds in the past where Meteor is your primary form of damage, and the prime.
Yeah, but that's a Diablo 3 thing where you literally just had your main skill that you used for everything. For single target, for AoE, for everything. There was never a reason, there was never a need to have a single target focus. PoE actually had the same thing. When PoE started initially, most builds had a single target boss killer skill and an AoE skill that they would use. Now, admittedly, everyone just uses the AoE skill and no one cares. Maybe they swap out a single gem, for example, a slower proj for a boss, but usually it's kind of inconsequential nowadays. I really want this playstyle to be like, oh yeah, this is my Blizzard. It's really cool. It's augmented. It feels unique. It does like cool things and whatnot. But you can't spam it. It's something that you can use time to time. It doesn't have a huge cooldown or anything, but you kind of weave these skills one after another. You use this, you use that, then you switch to this, and things like that. Now, that is the gameplay that honestly is just absolutely the best.
Primary ability you're augmenting through different gear or effects, and it's going to be no different in Diablo 4. And that brings us to the final category, which are ultimate skills. And these work a little bit differently than all of the other skill categories, because any of the other skills we went over in any of the other categories can be used in any way you want. So if you want to have 4 core abilities on your bars, you could do that and legitimately use a build with 4 different core abilities. And you can mix and match any of the other skills from any of the other categories as you wish. But with ultimate skills, you can only have one chosen at a time. And ultimate skills are generally going to be much stronger skills than anything else you have available, but are usually going to have some really big downside, generally being a really long cooldown. And from everything I've seen in Diablo 4, it is not easy to get a lot of cooldown reduction, so it's seeming like
that is actually really good. There's not going to be a lot of cooldown reduction, because cooldown reduction would destroy. Cooldown reduction is probably the most sought after stat in games like this. For example, the first stat that people actually want is attack speed, because if you're attacking slow, even if it's a super super big hit, it feels bad. So you need a decent amount of attack speed, and then you want cooldown reduction, because the more you can spam your big hitters, well, the better it honestly feels. And when it comes to these ultis, I kind of don't like them to a degree, because there are a lot of people that are gonna get stuck with them. For example, if you have this one skill that does a tremendous amount of AoE damage, it's like, do you use it on 4 mobs, or do you wait longer? Now, the chances are, if you wait longer, maybe you don't even have an actual opportunity to use that skill at all. And that's a big problem. Or, do you just spam it? Do you just save it for the boss? Do you do it like that? There are situations where ultimate skills like that have a long cooldown don't work out in these types of games, because people just don't use them. Because there's better times to use them like that. So the cooldown needs to be feelable, but it needs to kind of be at the same time very sparing. So you can use it for just 4 enemies, and you don't have to worry about it not being up the next time you actually think you're going to fight something big.
Ultimate skills are going to be that really big burst button, but you're not going to be able to massively reduce its cooldown like you could in Diablo 3. So for instance, we have Deep Freeze, has a 60-second cooldown, and you encase yourself in ice, becoming immune for 4 seconds, continually.
60-second cooldown seems, well, it depends on the game pacing, but 60 seconds seems a bit much. I think there's going to be a lot of people who end up not using their ultis, because how do you know if it's the right time, right? Do you want to use it there? Nah, you probably should save it. There's going to be a lot of people like that. So these type of big skills in games like this are typically a little bit of a problem.
Chilling enemies for 20%. When Deep Freeze ends, frozen enemies will shatter for massive damage, and you can cast this again to end it early. And that's honestly a bit more of a unique example of an ultimate skill, probably why they've shown off this skill multiple times over the years.
Yep.
But then you have things like Inferno with a 45-second cooldown, ignite a roaring Inferno that passes in and out of a target area, dealing massive damage over 8 seconds, then
now this is a lot better, 30 seconds, but then you kind of want to, if it's 30 seconds, and you can get it down to like 20 seconds, people are want to make this like their main thing that they cast and build around, which also opens up a can of worms that maybe we don't potentially want to deal with.
Explodes, dealing more damage to enemies on the outer edge. And we don't know all of the different skills that are going to be in the ultimate category, but presumably there are going to be other skills that just buff up your character as well. For instance, in Diablo 3, you had the Archon ability, which was one of the abilities that many builds were completely focused around. So that brings.
And that was problematic, because Diablo 3 doesn't actually have cooldowns technically anymore. Well, they kind of do, but in the stages where cooldowns matter, the game is absolutely just, in my opinion, completely ruined. So these are things that we should probably try to avoid because it's a very delicate balance.
Brings us to the sorcerer's unique class mechanic. And if you don't know, every class in Diablo 4 is going to have a unique class mechanic that is generally a new customization system specific to that one class. And the sorcerer has enchantment slots. And this is going to be a system that you unlock at level 15 that you just have to do a quest for, and you will get your first enchantment slot. Then at level 30, you get the second. And it's seeming like you're only going to be having those 2 enchantment slots through the entirety of the game. Now, these enchantment slots essentially allow you to slot in any sorcerer ability into that enchantment slot that will give you a very powerful passive effect based on what ability is in that slot.
Now that sounds good, doesn't it? Now that sounds unique and fun.
Now, I've gone over the system before, and from previous information, it was said that you wouldn't be able to use an ability as an active ability if it was already in an enchantment slot, but it seems like that has changed, and now you're able to have one ability in an enchantment slot and on your action bar at the same time. And these
I'm gonna probably be making a Necro or Source first. Well, actually, no, I can't. Well, Necro is 100% the first thing I'm gonna go for. There is no reality where I don't always make a Necro my first thing.
passive abilities are not only going to be an incredibly strong passive effect, but there's also going to be a lot of different combinations from these passives that can play into other skills on the sorcerer and can play heavily into your specific build. Now, to put a skill into an enchantment slot, you do need that skill to be learned. And you do that either by putting one of your class skill points into it, or by having a piece of gear with plus skill rank into that specific skill, because that will learn you the skill as well. And whatever skill you put in an enchantment slot will also keep all of its different upgrades. So you can upgrade a skill 5 times through your class skill tree. It'll keep those upgrades, and the different augment upgrades you get to choose through your class tree will also continue to be on that skill when in an enchantment slot. So for instance, if you put Frozen Orb into an enchantment slot, it would give you the effect of whenever you cast a non-basic skill, you have a 20% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at a nearby enemy. And keep
You see, these kind of things are also really, really cool. Because, let's face it, do you want this? Or do you want plus 10% damage output? No, of course you don't want. These things need to be unique. And the more unique they are, the honestly better.
Keep in mind, if you fully upgraded and went into Frozen Orb, this Frozen Orb that would be launched at a random enemy would also be fully upgraded, and it would have any other effects you have that affect Frozen Orbs. So even things like legendary powers that would affect a specific ability would also affect the enchantment slot passives. And again, you could also have Frozen Orb as an active ability on your action bar while also having it in that enchantment slot. So you could potentially just be spamming out Frozen Orbs everywhere. And something to note with this is that it's any time you cast a non-basic skill, Frozen Orb isn't a basic skill, so you could also have Frozen Orb being your main damaging spamming ability, having it in an enchantment slot, and just be generating additional Frozen Orbs whenever you use a Frozen Orb.
Sounds
and I
good.
do think a lot of people are going to have one of these slots primarily for a defensive skill, because some of them are going to be incredibly strong, and having a very strong defensive passive effect is going to be good for pretty much any build. For instance, you have Flame Shield, which when put into an enchantment slot will automatically activate Flame Shield when you take fatal damage, but it takes 120 seconds for this effect to recharge. Now, Flame Shield is a thing that
a lot of this is probably going to also be, to a degree, how Diablo 3 is currently with the passive spells. Not the passive spells, but I don't know what you call them. Passives, I forgot. But, you have 3 slots. Actually, no, now you have 4 slots for them. It's going to be pretty much that system.
That makes you immune for 2 seconds. So instead of dying every 120 seconds, you can actually just skip that death, and it activates Flame Shield for you, making you immune to damage for a few seconds, essentially giving you a cheat death. And I'm betting most sorcerers playing hardcore are probably going to be using this because this is incredibly strong. So that
Yep.
is a general overview from the sorcerer or sorceress class. And if you like playing wizards or elementalists or mages from other RPGs, you're probably going to like the sorcerer class. It is exactly what you would expect. Massive AoE, lots of CC, but a glass cannon type of class. And also keep in mind, this is just an overview that'll give you a good idea of what the sorcerer has to offer, but I'm also still planning to do videos for every class, including the sorcerer, going over all of their abilities and their ability upgrades. Now, I'm not doing that in this same video because the video would just be ridiculously long. So I want this to be more of an overview to get a good idea of what all the classes are going to offer, to give you better information on choosing a class once the game is released. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about the Sorceress class in Diablo 4.
Well, looks pretty good. Very informative. Me likey. Well, kind of what you would expect. Well, kind of exactly what you would expect. And I like it. As long as we don't go the slippery slopes where, oh, we need to make it so everything's spammable, I think it's going to be great. The moment we make everything is spammable, everything can be used the main skill, and all your other abilities are literally just buff icons pretty much that are passive bonuses, that's when we're going to have problems. So hopefully that doesn't happen at all. Currently, still extremely obviously excited for Diablo 4. Man, a lot of good stuff is happening. Hogwarts Legacies, this thing, oh, so much. Anyway, that's pretty much it. Like and subscribe.